Leonardo DiCaprio was a farmer in Kansas. He lived alone in an old farmhouse surrounded by fields. His life was simple: wake up early, take care of the crops, and rest in the evening. But on this night, something strange happened. He was sitting in his living room watching a movie when he heard a noise. It came from the basement. At first he ignored it, thinking it was just the old pipes or maybe a rat. But then, the noise grew louder. It wasn't a normal sound. It was deep, low, and heavy like a growl. It reminded him of a bear's roar, but he knew there were no bears in Kansas. Leonardo paused the movie. He sat still, listening. The sound came again, a deep, rumbling noise from below. His heart beat faster. He thought about ignoring it, but curiosity won. He grabbed a flashlight from the table and walked toward the basement door. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down. The air was cold. The smell of dust and damp wood filled his nose. Step by step, he walked down, his flashlight guiding the way. The basement was quiet now. Maybe he had imagined it. He moved forward, scanning the room. Boxes, old tools, and farming equipment were stacked against the walls. Everything looked normal. But as he stood there, the noise returned. It was coming from behind the wall. Leonardo took a deep breath and walked closer. He placed his ear against the surface. The growling sound was still there. It was real. He stepped back. His mind raced. What could be behind the wall? Was it an animal? A secret room? He needed to find out. He grabbed a hammer from a nearby shelf. Without hesitation, he swung hard against the bricks. The impact sent dust flying into the air. He coughed but kept going, breaking piece after piece. The noise behind the wall didn't stop. It almost felt like whatever was inside knew he was coming. After several hard swings, a large chunk of bricks crumbled to the ground. Leonardo wiped his forehead, breathing heavily. As the dust cleared, he saw something unexpected: a metal door. His heart pounded. It was old and rusted but sturdy. There was no handle, only a small lock near the middle. Why would there be a door hidden behind a basement wall? He reached out and touched the cold metal. He felt a shiver run down his spine. This wasn't normal. This wasn't supposed to be here. He hesitated. Maybe he should turn back. Maybe some things were better left unknown. But his curiosity was too strong. He placed both hands on the door and pushed. With a loud creak, it swung open. A long, dark tunnel stretched before him. The air was damp. The ground was uneven. He turned on his flashlight. Then he stepped inside. Leonardo kept walking. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead. His footsteps echoed in the silence. The walls were rough, covered in dirt and strange marks. The air was thick, damp, and smelled of something rotten. His flashlight flickered for a moment. He stopped. His heart raced. If the light went out, he would be trapped in the dark. He shook it, and the beam steadied. He sighed and checked his phone. The battery was almost dead. Only 3% left. He frowned. Maybe he had gone too far. He had no idea how deep he was underground or how long it would take to get back. Just as he turned to leave, the noise came again, the deep growling sound. But this time, it was much closer. Leonardo froze. His body tensed. He gripped the flashlight tightly. Slowly, he turned around. His hands trembled. The flashlight beam shook as he lifted it. Then he saw it, a massive creature chained to the wall. Its skin was rough and dark like rock. Its claws were long and sharp. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, staring straight at him. Leonardo's breath caught in his throat. It was Godzilla. He stood frozen, unable to move. His mind struggled to understand what he was seeing. The monster was real. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a movie. It was right in front of him. Fear gripped him. But then another feeling took over: excitement. This was a discovery beyond anything. No one would believe him. He needed proof. His hands fumbled as he pulled out his phone. He opened the camera and hit record. The screen showed the massive creature, its eyes still locked on him. He zoomed in, capturing every detail: the rough scales, the heavy chains, the sharp teeth. He took a step closer, then another. His mind was too focused on recording. He didn't realize how close he was getting. The air grew hotter. The chains rattled slightly. The ground trembled under his feet, but Leonardo didn't notice. He kept recording. Then, in an instant, Godzilla moved. The chains shook violently. Dust and dirt fell from the ceiling. The growl turned into a roar. The ground shook. Leonardo finally looked up from his phone. Too late. A giant claw swung toward him. He tried to jump back, but the force of the attack sent him flying. His flashlight fell. His phone tumbled across the floor. Pain shot through his right leg. He screamed. Blood pooled around him. He gasped for breath, his vision blurring. He reached for his phone, but his fingers barely touched it. His whole body ached. Godzilla let out another growl, but the chains held it back. Leonardo knew one thing: he had to get out. Gritting his teeth, Leonardo grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim light barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough. His leg throbbed with every step, but he had no choice. He had to move. Blood dripped from his wound, leaving a dark trail behind him. His breaths were short and uneven. His hands brushed against the rough walls as he struggled to stay upright. The tunnel seemed endless. His vision blurred. His body grew weaker. Time lost meaning. He didn't know how long he had been walking. His phone's battery dropped to 1%. The flashlight flickered. Then he saw it. The metal door. Relief washed over him, but his strength was gone. He stumbled forward, using the last of his energy to push the door open. Light from the basement spilled in. He collapsed onto the cold floor, his body motionless. His fingers twitched, reaching for his phone, but he could barely move. His hands felt cold. His breaths slowed. The phone slipped from his grasp, the screen still glowing. It captured his pale face, his unfocused eyes, his last moments. Then, the battery died. Everything went silent. A day later, the police arrived at the farmhouse. A neighbor had called them, saying strange noises had come from the basement the night before. The house was quiet now, but something felt off. 2 officers entered the basement first. Their flashlights cut through the darkness. The air was heavy, carrying the faint smell of dried blood. Then they saw him. Leonardo's body lay motionless on the cold floor. His right leg was torn open. Blood had pooled beneath him and dried overnight. His pale face was frozen in fear. His hands were stiff. He had been dead for hours. One officer crouched beside him and noticed something in his grip. It was a phone. The screen was cracked, but the light was still on. Carefully, he pried it from Leonardo's fingers. "Looks like he was recording something," the officer said. He pressed play. The screen showed shaky footage of a long tunnel. Then, a massive underground facility. And finally, the creature. The officers stared at the screen, their faces tense. The video was grainy, but the image was clear enough. A massive figure chained to the wall. Glowing eyes, sharp claws, rough skin. One officer took a step back. "No way," he muttered. "This can't be real," another whispered. Before they could watch more, the phone screen flickered. The battery drained. The screen went black. Silence filled the room. One officer exhaled sharply. "We need backup." He grabbed his radio, but before he could speak, the ground shook beneath them. A deep growl rumbled through the walls. It was low and heavy, like something massive had just woken up. The officers froze. One of them whispered, "Did you hear that?" The others nodded slowly, their hands hovering over their weapons. Then, another shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. The floor vibrated beneath their boots. The metal door rattled. One officer turned toward the basement stairs. "We need to get out of here," he said. But before they could move, the ground cracked. A deep fracture split the basement floor. Dust and debris flew into the air. The officers stumbled backward as the crack widened. A final growl filled the room, louder than before. The sound rumbled through their chests, shaking their bones. Something was coming. Then a loud bang echoed through the basement. The metal door burst open. A cloud of dust and debris filled the air. The officers coughed, struggling to see. A massive shadow moved in the darkness. They drew their weapons. Their hands shook, but deep down, they knew. Bullets wouldn't help. The growling grew louder. Heavy footsteps made the ground tremble. Then, from the dust, a giant claw reached out. One officer screamed. Another fired his gun. The bullets disappeared into the darkness. It didn't matter. The last thing they saw were two glowing eyes staring at them through the dust. Then, silence. The next day, the farmhouse was empty. No sign of the officers. No blood. No bodies. Just an abandoned house. In the basement, Reynardo's phone lay on the floor again. The screen was cracked, but still glowing. A single message appeared on the screen. "Godzilla is coming for you.